Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 196. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Heather Dixon about her two new releases, her debut novel, Burlington, which released in August, and Last Summer at the Lake House, which released in October. Both of these books are standalone novels. Burlington is a unique twist on the domestic suspense genre. In this book, a mother of two moves to a new neighborhood and quickly gets caught up in the drama of the other mothers. However, the schoolyard politics soon take a dark turn when one of the moms goes missing. In contrast, Last Summer at the Lake House is a work of women's fiction. The story features three sisters who are called back to the family lake house after their father's death, only to learn that he was hiding a dark secret from them all. The setting for this story is near and dear to Heather's heart because it is based on the lake house her family visits every summer. In this episode, I'll chat with Heather about her writing journey, why she says character comes first in her stories, and what makes her books similar despite being in different genres, mainly the themes of motherhood, belonging, and identity, as well as a few other things coming up. Heather Dixon, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your debut novel, Burlington. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, so Burlington is about a mother of two young girls who moves to a new city and into an affluent neighborhood with her husband and her kids. She quits her job and she's ready to start this new chapter in her life. But when she gets settled, she quickly gets caught up in the drama and the lies of the rich and beautiful mothers in the neighborhood at her daughter's school. And soon after, one of her only friends in the area goes missing. So she then has to take a harder, longer look at who these women are and if she wants to be a part of their world. But ultimately, Burlington's about belonging and motherhood and the vulnerability of being a woman in this next stage of your life when you have young kids. And it's about looking for your place in life and questioning your surroundings. The idea actually first came to me when I was taking my oldest daughter to school for the first time. So the schoolyard thing was new for both of us. And I thought I understood it because I had been there and done that. But I found there were all these little groups and kind of unwritten rules that I didn't quite understand or know how to navigate. So I wanted to explore that. And then the plot and storyline and characters all kind of developed from there.
What was the spark for you where you thought, okay, I've got a story here? Was it a character? Was it a line of dialogue? Was it the setting? What was it that made you think, okay, I can sit down and create a story from this?
Yeah, for me, it's usually character. That comes to me first. And I knew I wanted to tell this story about this woman who I think is like a lot of women at this stage in their life when they have young kids and there's a lot of pressure on them and they're just sort of trying to find out where they fit in the world now. So for me, it started with the character of May. And then I knew I wanted to tell her story. And I've always found that when I start, plot isn't what comes to me first. It's usually the characterization. So I really had to work a lot on the structure and plot developing out of there. But it started with me wanting to tell the May's story in particular.
Tell us a little bit about May. What do we need to know about her?
I would say that May is, she's a mother of two young kids. She's somewhat of an introverted extrovert kind of. She's like a little shy and a little bit insecure, but likes meeting new people and getting to know them. She's, empathetic but she'd like to feel, more comfortable in her own skin. But I think, when you have young kids and you go through the baby stage and the toddler stage, it's just all about them. And then when they get a little bit older, you start to and they're more independent. They go off to school. You start to discover that you have a role now outside of just being all the time a mother. And so when May moves to this new neighborhood, it's not only that she's not mothering all the time, but she's now kind of discovering how she fits into this world she doesn't quite know how to navigate.
And the setting becomes important for your book.
Yeah.
How did you create this neighborhood, this sort of schoolyard clique? And what did you do to make sure that it had that sort of slightly creepy element to it, that slightly unsettling aspect?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is Burlington, Vermont is where the book is set, but I actually live in Burlington, Ontario. And when I was researching where to set the book, I knew I wanted it somewhere similar to where I live. But I knew that if I set it in like Burlington, Ontario, it would be a little too close to home. And then when I was looking into where to set it, I found out that there was actually something like, I think, 30 cities called Burlington in Canada and the US. And I started to see this as a bit of a metaphor because, I found in my own neighborhood this sort of weird feeling of, schoolyard politics a little bit. And I thought it was maybe just where I lived, but after talking to people, I realized it's kind of everywhere. It can be everywhere. And the feelings and the themes I wanted to explore are also universal. So, of belonging and wanting to fit in and find your place and feel comfortable and have friends. And I thought that was a universal thing as well. So Burlington could have been any Burlington. It could have been any city, any one of the 30 cities, I thought. And I always start with a little kernel of truth. So, I took little ideas and inspiration from that I got from around my own kids' schoolyard, and then obviously have to make it bigger, fictionalize it more to give it more of a, interesting story. But that's where I kind of got the initial spark of, the creepy schoolyard.
Have you gotten feedback from anybody who has read the story? Anybody read it and said, wow, this rings true. This feels familiar.
Well, when I had early readers way back, like beta readers before it was even on, sent out for querying, that was when I would hear from people say, "Oh, this is like where I live too," or "Yeah, I know these kinds of women," and obviously I made them even more dramatic than I think most people are. But I think what I was trying to explore was that these feelings are in all of us. Like we all feel a little bit like we don't fit in or a little bit insecure or inadequate. And I think, belonging is something that all humans want.
I want to talk a little bit about the genre for this book, because it seems like there is sort of a rise in popularity recently for these sort of domestic suspense or thriller type stories. Probably because people find the idea of something traumatic happening to their family, their home, their neighborhood to be something truly frightening. Did you feel that when you were writing this book, this idea that when it hits close to home, it's even more frightening than something that maybe several times removed from your own life?
Yeah, I think things that make people uncomfortable, they'd like to say, well, that would never happen to me, because if they can, then they can separate themselves from this kind of odd or uncomfortable feeling. So when I set out to write it, I wasn't specifically thinking about a certain genre. I was just sort of thinking about what story I wanted to tell. And I considered it, suspense. I also considered it women's fiction because it tells the story of a female protagonist. And then when I did sort of start to tell a story that was close to home, I did feel like it was getting a little bit more on the creepy and uncomfortable side. But I think the domestic suspense is probably the best way to categorize it, because it does tell a story of regular life, but dramatized.
The book gets classified sometimes as thriller or even mystery or whatever. I think your description of it being more suspense feels probably more accurate, but it seems like readers and sometimes authors use mystery, thriller, suspense interchangeably when they're really not. Do you agree? Do you find that?
Yeah, 100% agree. I think when I first was writing it, I actually, because it's my first, it's my debut, I wasn't actually thinking very specifically about genre. And it was only when it kind of had to be categorized to be in certain websites that the thriller part came out. I once heard someone somewhere refer to a book as a thriller that I had never thought was a thriller at all. So I think it can happen where someone will call it a certain genre and then it'll kind of snowball from there. But I personally never thought it was really like a thriller. To me, it's more of a slower burn, but I do know that it has to be categorized in certain groupings to fit into like booksellers' websites, for example.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the book that follows this one. So you have another book out. So Burlington was just out in August of this year.
Yeah.
And only a couple of months later, you released a second book, Last Summer at the Lake House. Can you tell us a little bit about your second book?
Yeah. So when I first started writing, I didn't really know much about, the craft of writing and plot and structure and all of that. So I wrote a book and soon after started querying it. I mean, I did have beta readers and everything, but sent it out and realized very early on that it was not ready. So I set it aside and wrote a second book. And that is what Last Summer at the Lake House became. And my third book that I wrote was actually what Burlington became. So I had set Last Summer at the Lake House aside for years and focused on Burlington, and then decided to go back to it and do a lot of reworking and revisions. And it developed into Last Summer at the Lake House. So it's about three sisters, and they're called back to the family lake house in the fictional town of Somerville after the death of their father, and then learn that he was hiding a devastating secret. They each then have to deal in their own way with the fallout from their father's secret history, and their lives begin to change in ways that, they could never have predicted. It's about, again, sisterhood, motherhood, marriage. I think I tell stories in this with this similar themes. So it's about it has a lot of the same themes as Burlington, but it's a different story, a completely kind of different story. This one is, I think, being called women's fiction.
And do you find that these themes that you're finding that are common through your stories, do you have those in mind when you sit down to start the book? Or is it once the book is underway, or once it's finished, you realize, so that's what it's about?
Yeah, I think it's more of that. It's like I'm starting to find I almost can't help but bring these themes into the stories. I don't intend to, but it just happens. And I do usually start out with an idea about a character and wanting to tell their story. And then, yes, get to the end of maybe the first draft and realize what the book is actually about. And I think that because things like motherhood are important to me, it comes out very strongly in my books as well.
Let's go back to Last Summer at the Lake House for a moment. Can you introduce us to the three sisters in this, Alex, Sam, and Jess?
Yeah, so Alex is the oldest sister, and she likes to be in control of things and, very responsible. And Sam is the middle sister, and she's a little bit more of a free spirit, a little bit more of a wild card. And Jess is the youngest sister, and she is a little more introverted, quieter. She doesn't like confrontation, and she goes along with what her sisters usually want to say and do. I have three daughters, and they're quite young, but I found that really helped me with sort of personality. And I think there is something to be said for birth order. And I I found when I was fine tuning the characters and their characteristics that having three daughters helped with, say what an oldest child might be like or what a middle child might be like.
And you've put them at this lake house, this family lake house, where they've been called back to deal with the death of their father. What was it about the setting that was important for you to establish not only the dynamic between the sisters, but also the weight of what they were dealing with?
For me, there is something just that I absolutely love about, a cottage or a lake. And I have been going with my family for the past like 11 years to a cottage every summer in a little town that is very similar to Somerville. And I just knew that I wanted to set books in the summer at that kind of cottage, lake house type setting. And I think it's a good place to take characters away from their regular everyday life and bring them to a new spot where, they're in close quarters and they have to deal with the problems that they're facing because they're there together for one purpose and they don't have other distractions from their regular life.
So you've sort of gone in reverse order for your book releases. First one out, the third book you wrote, and so on. What are your plans going forwards? Do you think about, say, sequels to any of your books? Do you prefer the idea of just standalone novels? Do you have works in progress at the moment?
Yeah, I have another book that is set in the same place as Last Summer at the Lake House that I've just been finishing up. And so it's also set in Somerville. It's a fictional cottage town. And that one actually is going to come out in January of 2024. And when I first started writing, I actually never thought about writing a series or sequels. I just sort of get ideas and then want to explore them. So Burlington to me was a story that I really wanted to tell because of the character. And Last Summer at the Lake House, again, it was about the characters, but it was also somewhere that I knew I really wanted to set a story. And then the next one that is set in Somerville is sort of a combination of the two. It's, again, a story of a mother and a daughter that I wanted to tell. And it's set again in the same spot that I just hold very dear to my heart. But going forward, I think I really want to just hopefully be able to keep writing books and hopefully keep getting ideas and see where they go from there. I have written 5 manuscripts now, and I still absolutely love that process of writing that first draft, even though it is very difficult. I find it's really exciting when you're starting something new and you don't know where it's going to go and what it's going to develop into. So I usually don't start out with an idea in mind of what exactly I want to write, but I have a loose idea and then try to develop it and, outline a little bit from there and then see where it ends up.
Has your writing process changed or evolved from that very first manuscript you wrote to your latest one?
Yes, when I first wrote my first one, I didn't know what I was doing, but I have been a lifelong reader. And so I thought it was a little bit intuitive that, I could write a book because I love reading books and I sort of know how they're set up. But I learned that there was a lot about structure and plot and character arcs that I did not know. So because I love reading, I read, I don't know, as many craft books as I think I could find. And I take little bits from each. And then I also took some courses, some online writing courses, because I found that I can write it comes more naturally to me to write about a character and a setting, but the actual plot is the tough part for me. So I need a little structure when it comes to that. So now I try to outline the main points before I start writing.
Yeah. Do you find that the characters like to stick to that outline, or do they have a tendency to veer off and want to go their separate ways?
Yeah, I think they definitely veer off. And the editing process is where the magic happens, I find too, because I used to think it was like, well, they can't veer off because this is what I had planned to do. But then I listened to another author speaking once, and they said, well, you can. It's your book, it's your character. They can do what they want. You can change it however you need to. So yeah, I find that where I start from, it is not ever where it ends up being.
Do you know the endings of your books before you start them, or do you leave that open?
I usually know like basically how I'd like it to end, like
Yeah.
where I would like the characters to be. But again, yeah, it develops as I write it.
I'm curious because you now have several books, two out and more coming. Was the road to publishing and the road after publication what you thought it would be? Is the journey what you anticipated, or was there anything that surprised or shocked you about publishing books and sending them out into the world?
Yeah, it was nothing like I thought it was going to be like at all. It's been really interesting. So the writing part is, the part I love the most. Querying is very difficult. And I heard early on someone say that persistence is probably one of the most important things. And, I keep hearing just keep going, keep going. And it actually is very true because I realized you have to be willing to pick yourself up after being told no over and over and over again and just keep going. And one of the things I tend to do is move on to the next manuscript after writing one. So I spend a lot of time revising and editing and, having readers read it and getting their feedback and revising. But then when I feel I've done as much with it as I can, I move on to the next manuscript. And I think that has helped me keep going throughout all of this because I also very early on remember hearing an author say that they had written 3 books before they got their first published. And at the time I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. That's so much work that, just gets set aside. But I realized none of it is wasted because it's practice writing. And then I learned you can come back to one after it's been shelved. And then letting it go out into the world and it no longer being yours was definitely tougher than I imagined. I think most creative people are probably sensitive. And so those first few reviews can be tough. You can have like 10 great reviews and 1 negative, and you can't help but dwell on the negative. So that has been a little tougher than I thought. And I also sort of thought once it's out, most of the work is done, but realized there's a lot to do to promote and to market your book and to keep making sure your readers find it.
Yeah. Do you have other goals for yourself as a writer? I mean, other than the work in progress, finishing it and sending it out, do you have other goals or the things you want to accomplish?
Well, my number one goal at first was to write a book. And then then it, developed into to get it published. And then I always wanted to see my book in a bookstore. And that happened with Burlington. So when I walked into the store with my kids and my husband and we saw my book there, I was like, oh my goodness, every dream I've ever had, has just been achieved. But then the goalposts keep moving. Right. So I'm not 100% sure yet what my next goal is, but I do know that I just love writing so much that I just want to keep doing it. So my goal is to, I guess, be as successful enough to be allowed to keep writing books and having them published and having readers find them.
Have you always wanted to be a writer, or is this just something you struck upon later in life?
No, yeah, I've always wanted to be a writer. When I was little, I fell in love with so many books that were so just magical when I was a little kid. So books by Beverly Cleary, Anne M. Martin, and Judy Blume. And I just loved reading so much. And then from there, I started writing little stories when I was young. And I wrote, quite consistently until I got to university, where I did an English literature degree. And so university is busy, so less time to write for myself. And then, got a job and then had a family. And it wasn't actually until I had my kids and they got, a little bit out of the baby stage that I found my way back to writing for myself again. And I started with writing personal essays about motherhood back when my kids were babies. I find that whenever something is difficult for me to understand or process, if I write about it, I feel so much better. I only, would sometimes post things on my own little website, but found people really related to what I was writing. So I realized that other people feel the way I feel. So after I had spent some time writing personal essays or mom blogs, I guess, I thought, I think now is a good time to finally try to write the book I've always wanted to write. So ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to write books, but I didn't know that could be like a career.
Well, now that it is, if people want to learn more about you and your books and look for new releases, all that sort of stuff, where should they go to find you and that information?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's heatherdixon.ca, because I live in Canada. There is another author named Heather Dixon. So if you're looking for me on social media, on Instagram, I'm Heather Dixon Writer. And I'm also that on Facebook as well. And on Twitter, I'm H Dixon Writer.
And if people want to purchase a copy of Burlington or Last Summer at the Lake House, where can they go to find them?
So Burlington is in Canada. It's available in store in Indigo and Chapters. It is also available online, wherever you would buy books online, I guess. There's Amazon and bookshop.org. And Last Summer at the Lake House is available in Kindle edition on Amazon.
Good. Well, Heather, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Burlington and Last Summer at the Lake House and book number 3 that'll come out beginning of 2024. Other works in progress. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much. It's been really great to be here. Thank you for having me.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.